Hey gang, it's been a while, but I'm back and I have not one, but two new tutorials for you all. Lately, I've been using Figma a lot to put together simple materials and layouts, and I wanted to show what that can look like in practice. So in this first tutorial, I'll be showing how to create tiling displacement maps in Figma, export them, and then build a simple scene in Cinema 4D R25. Let's dive in. So here is the first scene that we're going to be working on. You'll notice here that there's some displacement maps. One is just, these are the same. It's using like a dot grid on these cubes, as well as this more subtle pattern here. So I'm going to be showing how to create both of these displacement map patterns in Figma, and then we'll bring them back into Cinema and create a brand new scene and build everything from scratch. So Figma, you can kind of see how this works, but let's build this from scratch. So our dot grid, which you can kind of see over here, is very simple. So we're just going to start with a circle or an ellipse. It doesn't have to be big because we're going to be tiling it a lot in Cinema. So all you need is one, a 200 by 200 px circle. You need to put this in a frame, so you can do this by grouping it, Control G, and then going over to the frame area and making it a frame. So since it groups the circle itself and the frame is 200 by 200, you have to make the frame bigger. So holding Control and dragging the edges of the frame box, you can get it to be 400 by 400 because we want it to have some space, some even spacing around it. And the beauty of Figma, sorry, dialing this in, is you can make this pattern really whatever you want. I'm using just a circle here, but it can be whatever you want. Since this is going to be repeated, we can test what that repeating looks like. So we'll just like do this as dot grid core. We'll make this a component by clicking this icon at the top. And the beauty of Figma is their auto layout feature. So you can test out this pattern in practice. Let's duplicate this by holding down Alt and it'll duplicate. So here we have an instance of this component. So as you can see, when we move this circle inside of the master component, it moves in the instance. So that means when you duplicate this even more, so we're going to create two and put them right up against each other. Each one of these instances moves around in its place. So let's select both of these, and we're going to make these an auto layout component. So when you go into the right hand sidebar and click the plus in the auto layout section, you'll notice that it groups both of these together in an auto layout frame. There's only two of these, but if you open the layer list, you'll see that there's two of the dot grid core components. And if we were to copy and paste these, it'll keep adding them to the stack. And you can see that as you add more, it just repeats that pattern in a horizontal fashion. But now we can do something really cool. We can take this auto layout frame and duplicate this by Alt, Shift, clicking and dragging. And then we take both of these and put them in another auto layout. So now we see that the pattern repeats horizontally and vertically. And we can add as many of these as we wanted to. Now we could have made this auto layout frame with all the dot grid cores another component, and then every time you add another row, it'll expand it. But we don't really need to do that in this case, because all we need is this one frame exported as an image. So what we'll need to do is first we want to add a background to this, and we're going to make it black. And so the way displacement maps work is it uses the black and white colors to define whether something goes up or down in the displacement map. So all we need is to export this one dot grid core component. I'm going to do a PNG and make it 4x, so it'll be nice and high res. We won't really need to have it that high res in this case. We're going to be scaling it down and tiling it, but we're just going to export this. All right, so now we have this selected, we can hit export, and then we're right in the texture folder that we have here. So we're just going to replace this .grid.png. So now that we have this .grid pattern, we'll be able to use it in whatever we want. Next, we're going to recreate this other line grid pattern, and there's two kind of components to it. One is, again, that core element, so let's create that. This is going to be, we're going to start with a frame this time. Just click the frame icon and then click anywhere, and it'll create a 100 by 100 frame. So we're going to make this frame 200 wide. So there we go. And right now we don't need the fill, so we're going to turn that off. And then inside of this, we want to create some rectangles. So again, we can create a rectangle here, and these are going to be 5 pixel wide and then 100 pixel tall, and we'll align it to the top left and right, or left and top side. We're going to make this white. All right, so we have the left line, and now we're going to duplicate this and rotate it and move it into the top right, the top position here. And we're going to make it as wide as this frame. So it's going to be 5 pixels tall and 200 pixels wide. All right, so now that we have this, we can create our component again. We'll call this line grid core. Awesome. So now that we have this, we can do the same thing and show how that works. So you want to duplicate it. So you have your instance of your component, and then you can duplicate this again, put it in an auto layout, and then when you duplicate this, again, it'll keep adding things to it. So the particular pattern that we have that we're going to be building today is 22 rows and columns. So we have 4 right now. Duplicate that for 8, 12, 16, 20, and then 2 more, 22. Excellent. So you kind of see it lines up with what we have in the bottom here. All right, so now that we have that, we want to make this a component, and we're going to call this line grid row. All right, so we want to keep these master components outside of the major groupings that we have. So we're going to duplicate it again so that it lines up exactly with, and then we are going to put these in a auto layout so that they tile, and you can see how if we duplicate this again, it'll keep adding rows. So pretty simple. Same thing. We'll repeat the process. 8, 12, 16, 20, 22. Excellent. So the thing with our particular pattern is we have these rows with these thicker dividers. So how are we going to do that? Well, we have to do some manual work here to get this to work exactly the way we want it to, but it's not too bad. So let's create some rectangles that we're going to first put this whole thing in a frame. So let's do that. So there's going to be stuff that we overlay with this auto layout component, and we can lock this. Let's create a rectangle. I'm going to put this in the top left, and we're going to make this 20 pixels tall, and we're just going to drag it to make it the full width of the box. I think that's the right, yeah, that's the right size. All right, so we have this one on the top, and we have another one that we want to make on the left. So we're going to do that. We're going to resize this a bit so that it stays within the confines of our box here. So that's great. Next, we want to make sure that this is duplicated in a square. So, because when you're making textures or materials, you want to make sure that they're squares, or else you're going to get some weird distortion. You have to change like um, the sizing in the material nodes. So we're just going to duplicate this. Perfect. So now we can group these together and make them a frame. So now we have this really nice, oops, I didn't need to duplicate it. We have this really nice pattern here. And this is going to tile no matter how many times we stack it, both top and bottom, because of the way we overlaid these thicker lines. So we're going to call this line grid, and we're going to make this PNG. And we can just do, we'll do 2x on this in case we want the resolution later, but I don't think we'll need it. Actually, let's just keep it as 1x. Oh, we forgot to change some colors here. So we need to make it black and white. So that means we need a fill that's black, because we already have white lines everywhere. Great, perfect. All right, so let's export this. And again, we're going to do the line grid. So let's save that. Perfect. Okay, so now we're done in Figma and we're ready to jump in to Cinema again. All right, now we're in Cinema here. We're going to start real basic. We're just going to create a cube by clicking on the button here. And we don't need to change too much about this, but we do want to give it some rounded corners. So we're going to do that. Make it just a touch rounded. We'll tweak these as you'll see going forward. We're going to put this in a cloner by holding down Control, or actually Alt, and I'll put this in a cloner. We'd only need 4 cubes, so we're going to do 2 and 2. And you can kind of see there's 4 cubes. They're right up against each other because they're spaced the exact same amounts from each other. That's what we want. So what's next? We need to make these have some variation between them. Now we can make this, we could like break this apart manually and adjust these ourselves, but we can make it easy by making putting a random effector on here. So when you have that selected and you click on the random effector, you'll notice that they're now randomly being placed here. So we look at the different parameters that are being affected. There's both the X, Y, and Z axis, and we really only want one of these. So let's zero these out. And you'll notice that it's back to where it was. So if we tweak one of these, you'll see that it's affecting, just the up and down position, which is exactly what we want. So going back into the effector tab, we can position these so that they can be exactly how we want them to be. We can, change this seed value to get the exact positioning where we want. Let's see what we want here. Kind of want what we had in the reference, so we're going to tweak this until we find what we want. Let's see, that's actually pretty good. So let's stick with that for now. I like that. And next we're going to create a camera because we want to get positioning right. And let's zero this camera out so it's exactly the center. And then we're going to go into the camera view and adjust things in this this positioning, because I want this camera to look a certain way. So in the camera settings, I want the telephoto 135 because I want to flatten out some of these angles. And then as we tweak things, we can rotate this camera to where we want it to be. If we wanted to do this a different way, we could put this in a null and then rotate that null. So let's do that. We'll create a null at the 0 point and put this camera in the null. Now when we rotate the null, it's pointing at the same location that it always was, which is what we want. And then when we move the null, the camera will still say pointed at the location that we want it to do. So this was kind of the layout that we had, but we have to change the aspect ratio of our shot. So we want that Instagram aspect ratio 1080 by 1350, and you'll notice that the framing is not exactly right. So we want to again change the position of this null a little bit so that we're not seeing too much. We can push this camera just a little bit closer. That's where we got it. Okay, looking good. Maybe we can change the amount that these are affected. So let's bump this up. Let's change that to something like that maybe. That looks good. Okay, so this is the shot that we wanted. We can move this a little bit so it's more like centered. Next, since we have that all set up, we want to create some materials. So let's look at our render as it is right now. Right now we have this octane sky, which is black. I think we need this to be a little bit different. So let's change this. I think this one is set to black, and then we have to start putting some lights in here so we can start lighting our scene. So let's create an octane area light, and then going into our view here, we can rotate it. We want it to be perpendicular here, and we're going to put it somewhere like over here. We don't want it to be very strong, so let's just make it 25 power, and we want it to have a little bit warmer light, so let's do 4500. Okay, that is looking pretty good. The next light we want to add is our gobo. And I'm going to be using the Grayscale Gorilla's gobo lighting. So let's size this down and get that nice and tiny, and then we're going to put the gobo tag on it, so the HDRI link. Okay, so now that we have our HDRI link tag on here, we want to go into our octane light tag, go into distribution, add a image texture connection, go into that by clicking and then dragging the file text onto the HDRI link tag. So this won't immediately do anything, but if we click on the tag open plus library, we'll notice in the gobos tab we have all these gobos that we can select, and I was using the Palm 3. I think that's this one. All right, so we're still not seeing anything yet, so it means we got to bump up some intensity. Let's just make it 1000, see how that goes. I'm starting to see some. Let's go to 10,000. Great, we're starting to see it. But the distribution isn't exactly right, so we have to add a projection node, make this XYZ to UVW. Excellent. So let's change the position here. Put this up a little higher. Maybe we can rotate it. And then let's change some of the intensity here. Let's make this go into the image itself, increase it to 2, to 3. Okay, it looks pretty good. We might have to bump it up once we get some materials on here, once we realize that it's not the amount that we want. And we'll change this to like 5500. So it has a little bit lighter of a look. It already looks pretty good. I'm noticing like the cubes aren't as rounded as I'd like, so I'm going to go into them, and I'm just going to increase the number of subdivisions on the fillet. So that looks good. All right. So we can get started with our materials and start applying them. So if we were to take a material and put it on on this cube, it would apply to all the cubes. So we actually need more than one cube in the cloner. So all we have to do is control click and drag these cubes to have multiple cubes inside of here. And you'll notice that the position of these cubes inside the cloner doesn't change because it's duplicating the same cube in the same way. So that's exactly what we want. Let's get some of the materials from the Plus library. We're going to get some materials here. So the first one we're going to get is from Tech Products. I want the speckled plastic. Since these are alphabetical, let's go to speckled plastic. We're just going to drag this into our material section. Next one we want is from the Modern Surface Material Collection, and this is the terrazzo black. So I'm going to get that one. And let's see what else. Back into Tech Products, I should have stayed there. The sand-blasted aluminum. And I believe it's this darker one. So let's go with that. And then we're going to, I think it's in the EMC, Everyday Material Collection, plastics. We're going to get the red plastic scratched. So these are going to be our main materials. We're also going to be creating that little glass overlay really quickly here. So there's not a whole lot of modeling that we need to do. It's just placement and camera angles. So let's start applying some of these materials to see where they end up. So that's this speckled plastic. We don't want it on that one. We want it on the one in the upper right. So let's figure out, okay, that's the right one there. And then we're going to take the cube. Let's see, let's go into this one here is what we want there. And then this one, nope. I think we're missing one because I want that blue colored speckled plastic. Maybe I did some color shifting here, so let's do that. Speckled plastic. Great. Sandblasted aluminum. Boom. Great. All right, so we got some nice patterning going on here. The lighting definitely needs to be changed, so let's bump this up. Go back into this. We'll change it to 5. Get some more brightness. I wonder if I had this set to white in my other file. Change it to a RGB spectrum node. We have much brighter. Okay, that's good. But it doesn't need to be this bright. So let's just change this to like 0.2 because we don't need it to be that bright. 0.4 maybe. That's good. And then we want some more brightness here. That's too bright. But that's what we want. We want it to be nice and bright, right? So we're going to tweak this until we get it to be the brightness that we want. 500. Let's just bump down this one to 3. That's actually pretty good. It's got that nice overblown look from like direct sunlight that you'd get, which is exactly what we want. So let's tweak some things here. So this one cube with the terrazzo pattern is right here, and I want this one to have a little bit harder edge. So we're going to change the fillet down to 2, and with the one with the speckled plastic, I want this one to have a little bit more rounded. So we're going to go up to 10. Maybe just make this one, keep that one 5. Oops, 5. And then these other ones, I can bump this down so it has a little bit more harder edge too. Make this 4. Keep the other one the same. So now we have some variation in these different cubes. It's looking good. It doesn't have the depth of field in there yet. That's actually really easy to set up. So if we create a null and we move that null to be positioned like right on the edge of some of these, because we want it to like focus like right in this middle area here. So we're going to call this the focus null. And then we go into our camera. And notice here that it has this focus object. So if you drag the focus null into there, the camera is going to try to focus right on that null, wherever it is. And if we go into our Octane camera tag and change our thin lens, we go to the depth of field, we uncheck autofocus. And then we change our focal depth. And our scene is pretty big here, so this is like impossible to do with other cameras, but let's do it like make like 827. That's where we want it. And then we want the aperture set to 15. And we'll notice that we're getting that nice bokeh in the edges here. So that's where like we want it to be, which looks really nice. So let's play around with some other things. I'm going to move this camera, or the gobo, because I want the lines to kind of move in a certain direction. Let's try that. Yeah, okay. Cool. All right. So let's make our displacement texture on the red plastic first. All right. So we're going to open up our node editor. And by default, these are kind of messy. So if you select them all and then right click auto arrange selected, it'll, move these in the way we want. So, and you'll notice that there's nothing plugged into the displacement node currently. So let's make some room and move some of these textures around. And we're going to take displacement, create a displacement node. So if we drag out from the texture node, we're going to create an image texture, and it's going to automatically open our folder here. So let's click on the dot grid and bring that in. And you'll notice it looks real chunky by default, which is not what we want. So we need to make some changes here. First, let's go into the displacement. So we want this to be, let's say, the 2048 by 2048 displacement. You notice that it smooths out some of the pixelation. We can make this 4K displacement to make it as good as we want. And then we're going to go back into the image, and we're going to create transform and make this smaller. So that's what we want. And we want this to project like a box projection. That's what we want. Okay. Notice that it's a little bit too much of displacement here. So let's bump this down to like 3. Okay, that's good. And you'll see how it's kind of like clipping the edges of some of these. So we have to tweak this until we find the right value. Now you can drag these and find like the right, but I know there's a sweet spot here that we can hit. So one thing I like to do, let's just change this to 0.1. And when you put your mouse cursor after a value and you click, or you go up and down on the arrows, then it tweaks that value in the next decimal place by going up and down. So if you go up, then, so let's get this exactly where we want. And I think this 0 space is a little bit off. So let's tweak this. 0.5. Or is it 1? That's what we want. 1. Yeah, 1. And let's get this. What is 0.1? 0.1 where we wanted it. Not quite. Let's try tweaking it a little bit. All right, so we're going to open up our node editor again and start tweaking some more values. I think 0.1 is where we want it from a size perspective. We can kind of see like that's the right size, but some of the positioning is off. Like we're not centered like in this space. So if we go into this, the TX, TY, TZ, it means translate. So like we want to move it a little bit, where it should be. So let's get this dialed in exactly where we want it. Let's see. Boom, boom. Is this still not the way I want it here? What if I change this to 0.5? 0, 1, no. Maybe it's my size of my cubes. Roundedness, rounded corners. All right, tweaking some more of these values here is referencing my other file to make sure it's the right amounts here. So let's take this. We're going to do the exact same values from that other file. And then, so we were close. Let's reinitialize here. See how that's looking. And then we're going to take the displacement 2, 0, and there's going to be 2048, and the Gaussian 20. What this does is it softens out some of the edges so that they aren't perfectly hard, and that's what we want, to not have this be super hard. Still not the way I wanted it. It's all right. Did I change this here? Didn't put it in the right spot. Okay. So we can kind of see that's a little bit better. I want to tweak this a little bit because it's not centered exactly where I want it. It's interesting, you can do things exactly the same way and you get slightly different results. Just how it goes. Nothing's ever perfect. All right, so that is looking pretty good. We have the depth that we want here. So let's take some of this, and we're going to apply the same displacement texture to our cube that's up here. I think that's the sandblasted aluminum. So let's open this one up. This material is a little bit simpler, but we're going to do the same thing. Displacement, and then texture. We're going to take the same dot grid pattern, do some of the same things to it. This one, we want it to... This one we want them to go in, so we're going to invert the colors here. And then it'll reverse the direction of the displacement. And again, we're going to change the size here to be what we want it to be. So let's keep that. Keep it like that. Kind of like that. So now we have these two variables. We're going to go back in here. Up the size. Let's make this one 4K. Gaussian to blur the edges a little bit. Same thing. Let's make these a little deeper. Excellent. All right, that's the look we want. So now we're gonna apply that other texture to the speckled plastic. So let's open that up. Had to check why my renders were slowing down so much. I'm not sure exactly why, but I also noticed that I pulled the wrong material in for this cube. So I have this speckled plastic 2 material, and I copied my nodes over. So let's connect them up and then drop this speckled plastic material onto this cube. And you'll notice we have all the nice little ridges from the pattern grid, which is what we want. Looks great. And then we have this projection for XYZ to UVW. This makes sure that it looks right. And there's also some adjustment made to the position of this so that we get these patterns to line up a little bit better as they cross over from one face to another. So this is kind of like the basic look. The last detail to add to this one is those cylinders. So let's close out of our node editor. We don't really need it too much anymore. We're going to create an octane specular material, and this one is going to just have a little bit of roughness in it to make it that kind of like foggy glass look. And we're going to start with some pill shapes. So let's create some pill shapes and adjust the sizing there. As it stands right now, these are way too big. So let's rotate them, and we're going to put these in a cloner once we get the sizing exactly right. So let's take that about that size. And since we want the cloner to repeat these right about there, we're just going to alt-click that, and it'll put these in a cloner automatically. And we go to the object for the cloner and adjust the sizing. Actually, we want those. So let's make it just one layer. We want them to kind of like intersect with each other. So we're just going to get them nice and cozy and duplicate them. And okay. There we go. Duplicate some more. Get them spaced the way we want. Good, good. All right, so we want that kind of intersecting like that. It's up a little bit too high right now. We're getting too much shadow. So let's just bring it way down. And maybe pull it up a little bit. Oop. We'll move this up a bit so that it's not cutting in too much. Then we can apply our Octane Specular material to these, and we get that nice translucent look where some of the colors are coming through. Maybe we don't want as much roughness, so we can make that 0.1. There we go. Now we have some nice look there. So this is the basic setup for doing something like this. Very simple to get your displacement map set up and working in a way that will make for a nice scene. And you can use these to create all kinds of little details. And I like Figma personally because it lets you use that auto layout feature to repeat patterns and find cool and interesting ways to use symmetry in your materials without having to go into things like Illustrator or Photoshop to create those materials. And you can do those anywhere. Like Figma works on your iPad. So feel free to use it. It's free to use. The team features cost a little bit more. So if you wanted to collaborate with other artists or other designers, then those kind of features will end up costing you a little bit. But it's a great tool for making repeating patterns, creating illustrations, anything vector related. You can do some really powerful stuff with Figma, which we'll talk about in our next video. So thanks for watching on this one. I'd love to see the results that you can get following this tutorial. Hit me up with any of your results and any questions you might have, and I'll catch you on the next one. Bye-bye.